Hi, I'm Whitney.
And I'm Camden. Welcome to Ghosts and Garnets, Murder in Idaho.
Guys, we gave you a break last week. You know, you got 2 easy, breezy, non-murdery episodes. And we thought we'd really come back with a vengeance this week and hit you with a spree killer.
A spree killer! And one of the attorneys in Grangeville came in last week, and he thinks that we're hilarious, and
he would be correct.
I know. He's a very smart man. Lawyer. But anywho, he was talking about our podcast and how he loves our new words, ghosty and murdery. I said we're pretty professional at making up new words that we will continue to use.
Yes, yes. Whether they're real or not, it matters not to us.
Not at all.
You guys are catching what we're throwing at you. It's working for everyone. So, guys, the difference between a spree killer and a serial killer. Some people don't think that there's a difference. I think that there's a difference. I think this guy fits probably in both categories because I think that he has committed more crimes than he was convicted of.
Yes.
The general definition of a spree killer is a person who commits 2 or more murders without a cooling off period. Typically, with a serial killer, they will kill and then they have a little break from the crazy before they'll kill again, before eventually ramping up to the point where they'll get caught because they make mistakes. But a spree killer will sort of just go until they get caught. There's no cooling off period. And this guy seems to fit that, although I do think that I think he's responsible for more.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's a spree killer and a serial killer.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. I think probably the spree has a lot to do with the fact that he is also a methamphetamine addict, and that makes you quick.
Speedy.
It's a speedy drug. Makes you commit crimes in a speedy way. And, we talked about it last week. Methamphetamines, not a good time for anyone.
I'm going to say it again. Don't do drugs.
Do not. You're going to end up like this guy, and then we're going to talk about you on this podcast, and you're going to have nothing nice to say. Not a thing.
Not one thing.
Okay, well, this is a long one, so we're going to jump right in. So in February of 1987, in the town of Blackfoot, Idaho, which is in southeast Idaho, they had about 10,000 residents at that time, and they were in about their 3rd month of winter, and winters in Idaho are rough. In southeast Idaho, particularly, they are freezing, frigid, nightmare, don't leave your house for 5 months kind of winters. So they were in like the 3rd-ish month of nightmare time. And then this happened, which did not help the nightmare times at all. On the evening of February 28th, 21-year-old newlywed Stacy Baldwin was working the night shift at a convenience store called the Red Mini Barn. She and her high school boyfriend had married 6 months earlier, and her mom said that she was just starting the life she had always wanted. She was known to be kind, and she loved sports. She was super determined, and everyone that I read about and that we watched a documentary as well that we'll talk about, they all said she was incredibly tough. She did not put up with anybody's shit. So around midnight, 3 of her friends had decided to venture out in the freezing cold to rent videos from the convenience store. Do you remember when we used to go to A&W and rent videos? And is that what it's called, A&W? Where the co-op is now. M&W, thank you. And we would have to rent the actual VHS machine as well, which in the briefcase.
For you youths, these are these giant rectangular boxes that you put into another giant rectangular box that was hooked up to your TV. Yeah, I do. Those are my favorite Friday nights.
Yes, we would go to M&W and we would get TV dinners and rent giant VHS machines and the Purple People Eater movie.
It was a one-eyed giant purple people eater. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
It's my fave. Okay.
100.
Now that we've taken that trip down memory lane. So these ladies were going to go do that. Yeah. So they're crossing the ice-covered parking lot of the convenience store when they are almost hit by a dark green pickup truck that is reversing really quickly through the parking lot, and it almost hits them before speeding away. And they sort of just chalked it up to a drunk driver. So they went inside, but the store was empty. And Stacy's belongings were still behind the counter, including her coat and her purse, along with her car keys. They sort of searched around the store. They went into the walk-in cooler even in the back. And when they couldn't find her, they knew something was terribly wrong, and they called the police. The police showed up, and on the cash register, it kept track of all of the transactions. And it looked like the last transaction had happened just after midnight. And there was $200 missing from the till. They also noted that Stacy's car was still in the parking lot. Besides finding Stacy's belongings, they did not find much else, and they went to inform her husband that she was missing. He was shocked, and news made its way very quickly around town that Stacy had gone missing. So on top of every available police officer that they had in town, the community came out and started looking for her as well. Later that day, a dentist who knew Stacy, he was out driving around looking for her, and he was driving through an archery range, which was located about 5 miles northwest of Blackfoot, when he saw Stacy's body lying behind 2 dumpsters at the archery range. She was lying in the snow, and she was surrounded by blood. It was determined she had been shot 3 times and had been left to bleed out in the snow, as none of the gunshot wounds were immediately fatal. The police started investigating. They were looking around. It looked like, from the footprints in the snow, that she had gotten out of the vehicle somehow that she had traveled there in and was running away from her kidnapper when she had been shot in the back. She had a lot of defensive wounds. It was determined that she had been sexually assaulted, and they said it looked like she had fought like hell. There were shell casings from a .38 revolver on the ground in the snow, and they found an 18-inch long dark hair that was attached to her sweater, and she did not have long dark hair. They also noticed that her watch was missing. At this point, they sort of assumed that this was probably a robbery gone wrong with a sexual assault element, and without much to go on, they sort of started looking at small-time baddies in the area that they could start interviewing. This is so sad. I don't know, there's something about the nighttime and the cold and the idea that she was like hiding behind these dumpsters.
Yeah.
While she heard someone coming towards her and knowing that she was about to die. It breaks my heart.
Well, she's so young, newly married, just starting her whole entire life. And I don't know what it is about that whole 18-inch long dark hair, because it keeps coming up in this, and it's creepy to me.
It is creepy. It's
like the long purple fingers. Do you remember that story that I used to tell you?
Yes, I do remember that story you used to tell me, and that you literally just gave me PTSD with that voice that you just from my childhood. Candid Shacker, creeping me out since 1982.
I'm probably going to have a t-shirt made for you now.
Yeah.
So the police had received a tip that a man named Eric Whitney had been harassing Stacy and that he was angry because she had turned him down for a date. And when the police brought him in for questioning, he had scratches on his face, and they asked him about Stacy's murder, and apparently he said some strange things, but his time card from work proved that he was, in fact, working during the abduction and murder. And so at this point, the police had no leads. 16 days later, on March 16th, 23-year-old Nolan Haddon arrived to work that night to work his night shift at a convenience store called Buck's in Idaho Falls, which is about 30 minutes from Blackfoot. He had taken the job at Buck's to make some extra money while he attended school to become a radiation technician. He was in his last semester and was excited to graduate. He loved the outdoors and loved to go hunting and fishing. He was the youngest of 3 boys and was very close with his family. He wasn't scheduled to work that night, actually, but he had switched shifts with a female coworker. So at around 10:30, Nolan's brother Clay came to visit him. Clay had never come to visit him before, but something had steered him in the direction of his brother that night. He stayed for a few minutes, and they caught up before he headed home. At around 6 a.m. the next morning, another employee arrived at the convenience store to open up for the day. She found the store unlocked, the phone was off the hook, and there were bloody footprints near the open register. She called the owner of the store, who rushed over, and upon opening the door to the walk-in freezer, found Nolan lying in a pool of blood. He was breathing, so they called 911. When he arrived at the hospital, he was in critical condition, and his family was called, and they, of course, all raced to the hospital. When the police arrived on scene, they discovered that just over $100 had been stolen, along with cigarettes and a handful of lighters. It appeared that someone had come into the store right before closing around 11 p.m. and had ordered Nolan into the walk-in freezer, where he was made to kneel before he was shot 5 times. He was then left to die. One of the shots had entered Nolan's spine, so he was unable to move from the floor. The investigators did find partially burned paper bags and a lighter on the floor, where Nolan had attempted to light a fire to keep himself warm.
Oh.
I know. That is just like, how smart was he?
So smart.
Like, to have the wherewithal to think of that.
Yeah, to try to keep himself warm in the freezer.
Yeah, it's so sad. Nolan died at the hospital later that day from hypothermia and blood loss, which the detectives were talking about how devastated they were to think that if he had been found sooner, he may have lived.
Yeah.
The police lifted 149 fingerprints from the store, which they said for a store that was that busy wasn't a lot. But imagine having to go through 149 fingerprints.
In 1987, when they didn't have anything computerized.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The open safe containing $1,900 was left alone. Ballistics matched the bullets from both crime scenes. It was during this time the police put men at every convenience store that was open at night to keep the clerks safe. $1,900 just left.
Well, so Camden mentioned this show that we both watched, and it was a show that was done years ago on Investigation Discovery, and it was called something...
Ice Cold Killers.
But the episode name was Blizzard of Bullets, which I feel like nobody put forth any kind of effort.
No.
In the naming of that episode. They did a lot of reenactments. It was a little painful, frankly, to watch. But they did interview some of the investigators on the case and some family members and friends. So it was very good information, but it was very like 1990s investigative, semi-acted craziness.
I also read an article where they were talking about Nolan and the fact that, and they didn't talk about this on the documentary, but they said that he had longer hair. Yeah. So that originally they thought that maybe the killer had been casing this convenience store, had seen the woman who was actually supposed to be working there that night and mistook him for her.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then when he figured out that it wasn't a woman that he could sexually assault, he just killed Nolan to kill him. I mean, the safe was open. He could have locked him in the freezer, not shot him. I mean, he wanted to kill someone. That was the purpose. It wasn't the cigarettes and the lighters and the $116 that he took out of the register or whatever it was, $200.
No, he's a murderer.
Yes, this person was there to kill someone. He was there to hurt someone. And if it wasn't going to be the woman he thought that was supposed to be there working that night, it was,
going to be someone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could you imagine being that girl who was supposed to be working? Oh, God.
That he switched shifts with? Mm-mm.
Yeah.
No. So on the morning of March 19th, which was the same day as Nolan's funeral, a woman was reported missing by her husband. 34-year-old Susan Meckelbacher, who was a special education teacher, was not feeling well that day and decided she was not going to go into work. She left home around 6:30 in the morning, telling her husband that she was going to drop off her lesson plans at school so someone could take over her class for her, and then she was going to come home and rest. Her husband took their 2-year-old son to daycare and went to work. Around 7:30 in the morning, a woman named Valerie Staff was looking for a place to park in a grocery store parking lot when she nearly collided with an orange van. She stated 2 people were sitting in the front seats of the van and described the passenger as a man having long dark hair, quote, being real big, real kind of rough and dirty looking. She reported both people appeared to be agitated, and she watched the van back up and then drive toward a bank that was located at the far end of the parking lot. When the bank opened, the van was seen going through the drive-through part of the bank. The teller in the drive-through recognized Susan, who gave her a check made out for $1,000 in cash. The teller cashed the check, and within a matter of minutes, bank records show that another $1,000 check was cashed at a different branch of the same bank in town. Later that day, a woman named Susan Browning was preparing to leave her home when she saw an orange van stop on the shoulder of the highway, and she noticed the van because it was blocking her driveway. Eventually, the van left, and it was not seen again until the following day, where it was found in the same grocery store that it had been seen in the day before. A long brown hair was found inside of the van, and police noted that the van had a scratched exterior and the undercarriage of the van was covered in mud, and there was cheatgrass embedded underneath. And for those of you who don't know what cheatgrass is, it's like it's something that grows a lot in the foothills and the desert, and it's sort of like a hay consistency.
Yeah.
Would you say?
Yeah.
Anyway, it gets stuck on everything, and it's a pain in the ass. But this is crazy. So one of the deputies on scene, when they were processing this car, recognized the kind of cheatgrass that it was and was like, well, that's the kind of cheatgrass that only grows on the west side of town by Highway 20.
Yeah, that is bonkers.
Because around this area, it's just desert. I mean, you just have, it's flat, dry desert land. So cheatgrass is everywhere. And the fact that this cop knew enough about cheatgrass to be able to differentiate and be like, nope, that's the west side of town cheatgrass that's stuck under the van. So they started looking on the west side of town. 4 days later, on March 21st, as a group of law enforcement officers were searching the area, another deputy noticed that there was a break in a fence along the highway, and it looked like it wasn't a purposeful break. It looked like a car had sort of driven through the fence. So they stopped and they all fanned out and started tromping through the snow through this field. They soon found a stack of papers in the snow, and these papers were identified as the work of students and had Susan's grades, that she had been grading these papers and had not returned them to the students yet. It makes me very sad.
Mm-hmm.
So once they found those, they knew that she had to be close, and they stood 10 feet apart from each other and just started walking. And eventually, behind a group of trees, they found Susan's body. She had been raped and shot 9 times. And this is horrifying. You may not want to listen. I mean, you can speed forward 10 seconds if you'd like. But they also found that the assailant had ejaculated in her mouth, either before she died or after. They also found more spent bullet casings at the scene, which showed that the murderer had stopped after shooting her a certain amount of times and reloaded his gun so he could shoot her some more. And this is nuts. I've never heard of a piece of evidence like this. During the autopsy, they found a 16-inch long, dark hair embedded in Susan's heart. There had been a hair attached to her, and the bullet went into her body and lodged the hair into her heart. Ballistics showed later that these bullets matched the bullets used in the 2 prior murders. And this is another wild thing. The police started going around to the farms in the area, and a farmhand reported that he had heard 6 or 7 shots a few days prior, and then he had seen an orange van driving eastbound on a road leading away from the crime scene. As the van passed, the farmhand recognized the driver of the van as his cousin, Paul Ezra Rhoades. Wild.
What are the chances?
So detectives start looking into Rhoades, and they discover he's a petty criminal.
And one disgusting mother.
So the weirdest sentence I've ever said, I think.
Well,
he was linked to a recent sexual molestation of a mannequin in a lingerie store.
What the what?
I don't know how one molests. I mean, I can imagine how one would molest a mannequin. But anyway, he was suspected of doing that.
It was an unwanted advance, sir.
Anyway, but not only did he assault this poor mannequin, but then he shot the mannequin, which shows a whole extra level of crazy. What did this mannequin do to you, sir?
Well, clearly nothing.
She did not respond to his advances in the way he wanted. So investigators go to Rhoades' mother's house, who tells them that she thinks Paul has stolen her car. Police then decide to do sort of a media blitz. They release his image and information to the media nationwide, and a manhunt begins. Now, Paul is not, he is someone that is very easily recognizable. He's 6'2". He's like 250 pounds. He's got really long black hair.
Yeah, he's creepy as hell.
He's creepy as hell, and he's not somebody who's going to like blend in with the crowd. He's very easily noticeable. Anyway, this guy's a fucking monster creep, and I'm not going to have a single nice thing to say about him.
All right, let's get into a little bit about this grade A dickbag, Paul Rhoades. He was born on January 18th, 1957 in Idaho Falls. He was the first of 4 children. His parents were Augustus and Teresa Rhoades, and his early life was difficult, to say the least. It was reported that the household was abusive, and his parents had both struggled with substance abuse issues. At the age of 4, he contracted polio, which meant he was constantly hospitalized. He had to travel to Salt Lake for treatment, and sometimes he had to go alone because his mom had 3 other kids to take care of, which is crazy to me. He went through multiple surgeries, and he eventually did get past polio around the age of 12, but he had a limp that would stay with him the rest of his life. So not only is he 6'2", 250 pounds, long, gross, black hair, he's limping. Yeah, not noticeable at all.
Yeah.
By the age of 10, he had began drinking, and by 16, he had dropped out of school completely, and he later blamed his uncle and his grandmother for teaching him to drink and use drugs. He eventually developed an addiction to methamphetamines. He worked odd jobs in Idaho and surrounding states, and in addition to the construction work he found, he also started breaking into houses and stealing whatever wasn't nailed down. Family members later stated that he was unrecognizable after his methamphetamine addiction had taken control of his life. And most of the crimes he had committed were petty crimes up to this point, the most violent being resisting arrest. Although several women reported they had found Rhoades in their cars, but he had run away when they made a scene. Oh, he's just so...
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah. Well, and you know what else I find really sort of offensive about this whole thing is, I mean, you can feel bad for the kid. He had a horrible life. Agreed. But using his addiction issues to point to as a reason why he's a fucking monster and murders people and assaults mannequins, like, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. But as somebody who's in recovery, I can tell you that, yes, I did a lot of shit before I got sober that I would look back and go, oh my God, I can't believe I ever did that. But being an addict doesn't make you a murderer. It doesn't make you someone who is capable of leaving people to die in the snow after you sexually assault them.
No, that was just part of him. It had nothing to do with
like he did drugs because he liked feeling differently, but killing people made him feel different too. So I just don't enjoy it.
It's a cop-out.
It is a cop-out. It's a cop-out.
On March 22nd, Paul Rhoades arrived at a friend's house with a large amount of money and said he was on his way to Jackpot, Nevada. He was spotted a few hours later in his mom's stolen green Ford at a gas station between Idaho Falls and Jackpot. On March 24th, truck drivers reported seeing the stolen car on a highway median in Nevada. It appeared that the car had been crashed. The truck drivers described a man matching Paul Rhoades' description exiting the car, dropping something into the snow, and then running away. A highway patrolman responded to the accident and found a .38 caliber handgun lying on the ground near the open door of the car. Idaho police were notified that the car had been discovered, and a warrant was issued for Paul Ezra Rhoades' arrest for the car theft and the burglary of the lingerie store. The next day, Nevada police arrested Paul Rhoades as he played blackjack at a casino in Wells, Nevada, and he was arrested in bloody clothes and had Stacy's watch in his pocket. How disgusting. What were these people who were gambling with him, thinking?
He had blood on every piece of clothing he was wearing, not just his shoes, his pants and his shirt. And,
right.
And he's dirty and stinky. And I'm sorry, I know a lot of dirty, stinky people are probably in the casinos. But if you're looking at the rando dude next to you who's clearly on meth and he's covered in blood, it might be a sign that you maybe should call somebody.
But what do we know?
Not enough, apparently.
Paul was taken to the Nevada Highway Patrol office and his belongings were confiscated. The handgun that had been found next to the stolen car was tested, and ballistics testing would confirm this weapon did match the bullets that killed Stacy, Nolan, and Susan. Idaho police officers Victor Rodriguez and Dennis Shaw arrived in Nevada. They say that while questioning Paul Rhoades, he spontaneously blurted out, quote, "I did it," then laid his head on the table and went to sleep. What is it with all these guys getting so sleepy?
He's probably been awake for like 3 weeks on the meth.
Well,
and apparently killing people and molesting mannequins makes you very sleepy.
I guess so. They said he confessed twice this way. As a result, Rhoades was first charged with Susan Michelbacher's murder in addition to first-degree kidnapping, robbery, rape, desecration of a corpse, and 5 counts of firearm violations. It was decided that the 2 other murder charges would be tried in separate trials.
Just taking a moment. All right.
You ready now?
Yeah, sometimes I just need a moment to like shove this stuff that I've just processed like back deep into my psyche where it can just, hang out and fuck me up later.
Marinate.
So when I'm 77 years old, you and I are locked up in the cuckoo house together somewhere.
At 77?
Listen, we continue to do this. All right. On January 18th, 1988, Rhoades' first trial began after his attorney's bid for an insanity defense was rejected by the Idaho Supreme Court. Now, Idaho's so small. Among the possible choices for jurors was the governor at the time, Cecil Andrus, who had actually signed the extradition documents to get him back into Idaho from Nevada. So luckily, he didn't have to serve on the jury. Among the prosecution's witnesses was Victor Rodriguez, who claimed that he and 5 other officers had heard the defendant admit to Susan's murder while in their custody. And this is a little sketch, but he had failed to file the statement in a report due to, quote, an oversight. I know.
That's shady, sir.
It is shady. And I probably would get more into it if there wasn't all of the rest of the evidence. But because there is, I'm not going to get too deep into it. But that's shitty, shoddy police work. Just file the fucking statement. If he confesses, let's tell people he has.
It seems like the biggest
officially
piece of evidence. I mean, whatever.
So the claim was later contested by defense attorney John Rhoades. So like I said, we could get into this because there's a lot of information about these like spontaneous confessions. But because it was appealed to death, I mean, so many appeals about these supposedly 2 spontaneous confessions that he did when he was in Nevada. All of the appeals were heard and dismissed. So because of that, we're not going to spend an hour going through it. But Paul Rhoades says he never confessed. Some cops say he did. Either way, they have a case, I think. So by January 26th, the defense team had rested their case, with the proceedings being delayed for 2 hours as court officials had to wait for Paul Rhoades' suit to be returned from a dry cleaning store. Like that's going to make a big difference. On the following day, after less than 5 hours of deliberations, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts against Rhoades. On March 24th, Rhoades was sentenced to death for Susan Michelbacher's murder and to life imprisonment for all of the remaining charges. After the sentence was read out, this guy grabbed the chair he had been sitting in and he threw it at the prosecutor. Threw his chair right across the courtroom at the prosecutor. It was caught by the sheriff, though, before anyone could be hurt. Then, as Paul Rhoades was escorted out of the courtroom, by deputies, his sister, whose name is Paula Rhoades, hurled verbal abuses at the prosecutor. Just throw in a chair.
For sure. In the meantime, Rhoades was sent off to stand trial for the murder of Stacey Baldwin, which was held on March 3rd. His attorneys contended that the circumstantial evidence of the prosecution was flimsy and that his client's alibi of babysitting his sister's 2 children at the supposed time of the crime could be easily corroborated by his family members. Ooh, there's something shocking. In addition, they also claimed that a man's watch found in Rhoades' possession, which was claimed to have been stolen from Baldwin, was actually bought by Teresa Rhoades as a Christmas gift for her son. Bullshit. While the prosecution team did admit that the evidence was largely circumstantial, they pointed out that it overwhelmingly pointed towards Rhoades, most notably a distinct shoe imprint that was an identical match to his unusually large foot, as well as the bullets from his handgun. On March 12th, Rhoades was again found guilty on all counts by the jury and eventually sentenced to death for this murder as well, in addition to a life term plus 45 years for the other charges relating to Stacey Baldwin's death. While awaiting trial for Haddon's murder, Rhoades was interviewed by Utah police for a possible connection to at least 3 other murders in their jurisdiction that matched his modus operandi, or MO. The killings, which occurred in Salt Lake City and Layton, were the following. So the first one was Christine Gallegos. She was 18. She was shot to death at a parking lot in suburban Salt Lake City on May 15th, 1985. The second was Carla Maxwell. She was 20. She was a clerk who was shot 5 times while working at a 7-Eleven store in Layton on April 25th, 1986. The third one was Lisa Strong. She was 25. She was shot on a street corner in Salt Lake City on May 12th, 1986, while apparently running away from her assailant. According to the task force established to investigate these murders, all of which had been linked via the copper-jacketed, hollow-pointed bullets used, they had received information that placed Rhoades in the area at the time of the killings. In addition, they had located another handgun, which linked him to numerous burglaries and thefts committed at the Wasatch Front in Utah. Around the same time, he was proposed as a possible subject in the June 21st, 1984 murder of 25-year-old Lisa Ellers, who was found shot to death at a roadside in the Jackson Hole Valley near Bondurant, Wyoming. The main investigator for the task force, Jim Bell, later revealed in an interview with the Jackson Hole Guide that he was able to place Rhoades in the area at the time after conducting an interview with him. However, despite appeals for information to the public, no evidence connecting Rhoades to the killings ever surfaced, and he was never charged.
That's so sad.
It was so frustrating to work on those cases. And although he is going to be in prison and going to be put to death, to not have validation for those families. Mm-hmm.
And all of these murders are just open. It's really shocking what a difference DNA makes. I mean,
oh my God.
There wouldn't have even been trials if it had happened now, because his DNA would have been all over the fucking place because his hair just keeps falling out everywhere.
Gross. I wonder if that's a side effect of meth.
Probably. They talk about in the documentary, and then in a lot of articles that I read about this too, they were like, the hair was a match to hair taken from Paul Rhoades. And I'm like, okay, you lining 2 hairs up and saying that they look the same is garbage science. Okay, sir? Like, it's just so ridiculous. But it is interesting. We're just so used to, I think, in this day and age, just being like, well, is there DNA?
Oh, well, I know. Exactly. And I mean, it's the CSI, what is it, like CSI syndrome or something, that all of these like crime technicians and detectives, the police officers are so annoyed with because
yeah,
they think we can solve these things in a 45-minute time frame because of these shows. But anyway.
If it had happened today, he'd be totally fucked. But he's dead. So.
Oh, you gave away the ending.
Spoiler alert. The dude sentenced to death is dead. All right.
All right.
So, in a bid to avoid another prolonged trial, the prosecution and Rhoades' attorney worked out a plea agreement in which he would enter an Alford plea to second-degree murder and robbery. Now, an Alford plea essentially means that a defendant can maintain their innocence but concede that the prosecution has enough evidence against them that they would likely be convicted if they went to trial. Pursuant to the plea, he was sentenced to indeterminate life for second-degree murder and indeterminate life for robbery. Then he went to prison. And his days sort of looked like this. Offenders under the sentence of death are kept in their cells 23 hours a day. They have the option of being in an outside recreation area for 1 hour a day. The only other time inmates are out of their 12 by 7 foot cells is when they are escorted to the shower, meeting with an attorney, or being given medical care. Their hands are always restrained while they are being moved from one location to another. So this is sort of Paul Ezra Rhoades' existence from the time that he was sentenced until 2011. So this is what his life looked like for 24-ish years. During this time, though, as we said before, many, many appeals. In his October 21st, 2011 request for a clemency hearing, Rhoades at this point acknowledges that he is responsible for the 3 deaths and expressed guilt and remorse. He said, "3 people are dead because of me. I needlessly caused their deaths. My actions, my crimes, my responsibility," he wrote. "I cannot erase their loss and the pain they suffered because of my crimes, nor can I take away the pain endured by each of their family members." So that was on October 21st, 2011. On November 15th, 2011, attorneys for Rhoades filed an emergency appeal to the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, claiming that Idaho's new lethal injection protocol is likely to be botched, causing him to suffer excruciating pain in violation of the 8th Amendment, which is cruel and unusual punishment. Now keep that in the back of your head, the Idaho's new lethal injection protocol. That's going to come back. And on November 16th, 2011, the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals denies his plea to stop the scheduled execution.
On November 18th, 2011, Paul Ezra Rhoades was led to the execution chamber at the Idaho Maximum State Correctional Facility in Kuna. Members of the victims' families, friends, and 4 members of the news media were present. As his final statement, Rhoades apologized for the Susan Michelbacher murder, but did not take any responsibility for the other 2 murders. He said to Bert Michelbacher, "I'm sorry for the part I played in your wife's death. For Haddon, you still have to keep looking. I can't help you. I'm sorry for your family. I can't help you. I took part in the Michelbacher death. I can't help you guys. Sorry." A slap in the face.
Yeah.
Such a dirtbag. Then he faced the section that contained his representatives, and he said, "Mom, goodbye." And then he turned and faced the warden, Randy Blades, and said, "You guys, I forgive you. I really do." I'm sure they really give a shit. Then Paul Rhoades was executed by lethal injection. Towards the end of the execution, a friend of Susan Michelbacher said, quote, "The devil has gone home." It's chilling to me.
It is chilling. And we're not going to get into the political back and forth about the death penalty, because that's not what this show is about. But it is so gross to me that he knew he was going to die. And he looked at Nolan and Stacy's families and denied that he killed them.
After he'd already admitted it.
After he had confessed like a week before. I mean, you're going to continue to be a fucking asshole? I mean, really?
Well, I mean, it doesn't really, I mean, that's clearly he's just been a dickhead his whole life. So it's not going to change in the last seconds. You'd think maybe he'd have a come to Jesus, but.
Yeah, I think it was just one final slap on the face. It was one final, like,
fuck you.
Yep. I'm still not going to give you what you want. I'm going to just continue to torture you. And Nolan's family did not attend the execution. They all decided not to. But they all did say that they think justice was served. No. It's so hard because you read stories about serial killers or you watch stuff about them, and some of them you're like, you don't see why they do it, but you see that there's some kind of psychopathy within them that sort of leads them that way. And with this guy, I don't really see. I think he just wanted to cause pain. Like, I think he just wanted to cause mayhem.
Yeah, there was no rhyme or reason. I mean, there were mannequins, there were women, there were men, there were sexual
assaults.
And there was confessions, and then retractions, and then I'm sorry's, and then oh wait. It's just, he was chaotic mayhem.
Chaotic is the right word, I think.
Dick bag.
He's a dick bag.
Bag o' dicks.
So, guys, this Idaho this week, I think I read the article that I'm about to read to you at least 5 times before I sent it to Camden, and I said, this can't be real. But it is. And the fact that it wasn't made a bigger deal, it shows some real shady shit. But I'm going to read you guys this article. So, on January 21st, 2022, a joint investigative report by the Idaho Statesman and the Idaho Capital Sun was released. Idaho prison officials engaged in cloak and dagger practices, including twice sending state employees across state lines to make cash purchases of controlled substances intended for executions, actively concealing the intended use of the drugs, manipulating state records to cover up their activities, and acting in bad faith to stonewall public records request for execution-related information. Records obtained after nearly a decade of obstruction by Idaho Department of Corrections show how IDOC actively worked to keep its execution activities off the books. Top-level prison officials spent from confidential cash accounts, directed staff in an internal memo not to make any execution purchases through typical channels, and wound up sourcing the lethal injection drugs from pharmacies with dubious regulatory histories. An internal IDOC memo, he reported, includes pointers to prison staff on how to avoid the financial detection that could help identify a source of the execution drugs. The documents, the bulk of which were disclosed under court order as a result of a public records lawsuit brought by University of Idaho law professor Eliza Cover, show that IDOC used a pharmacist from a psychiatric treatment center, part of the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare Network, as the ghost purchaser of drugs to execute Paul Rhoades in 2011. A former IDOC deputy chief of prisons testified in a deposition that IDOC had paid, quote, upward of $10,000 in cash for the out-of-state drug purchase. After what an IDOC memo characterized as, quote, troubles with the Rhoades execution, prison officials found a new drug supplier for the 2012 execution of Richard Leavitt, the last person put to death in Idaho. Court documents and internal IDOC records show that IDOC chartered a private plane at a cost of $2,448 to fly current IDOC Director Josh Tuwalt and then IDOC Chief of Prisons Kevin Kemp round trip to Tacoma, Washington to purchase compounded phenobarbital from pharmacist Kim Burks, the owner of the Union Avenue Compounding Pharmacy. Tuwalt and Kemp brought a suitcase with $15,000 in cash with them and exchanged the money for the drugs in the Walmart parking lot of the shopping center in which the pharmacy was located.
What?
The fact that Idaho officials are handing over briefcases full of cash to unregulated pharmacists in Walmart parking lots.
Walmart!
That money, that's taxpayer money. That money that they are sliding across a seat in a parking lot to a pharmacist who has had her license suspended for being fucking shady.
Okay, so that is all just bananas.
Bananas.
Obviously, I don't know enough about the IDOC's policies on lethal injection and execution, but
why they've had to go these routes is because major pharmaceutical companies now refuse to make the lethal injection drugs. So they can't get them how they used to get them. It just, the idea that these fucking officials try to keep it from the public, and that is some shady shit.
It's just all wild.
I mean, that's like the kind of thing you see in a bad movie.
I was just like a C movie, not even a B movie.
No. I just,
All right. Well, that is the story of Paul Ezra Rhoades. We hope you enjoyed hanging out with us.
If you did, please like and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you would like to sponsor the show, our email address is ghostsandgarnets@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram at Ghosts and Garnets Podcast and on Facebook at Ghosts and Garnets Murder in Idaho.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.